turns all negative activity around. Mama, we the daughters of Earth, the sweet crone Trinity, have been inspired in the spirit of compassion for the well-being of our ancient cosmic family, to understand why you connected this trio to demonstrate the magic of your power, to awaken and protect our universal ancient family. Welcome to Talk with Mama Yah on Truth Uncompromised. Empower our ability with the authority of our common purpose. We are one in the best interest of our global family. In your essence as ancient of the ancient, Mama, please allow this Trinity to naturally raise upright our fallen sisters, to elevate them to their true celestial level in mind and spiritual substance. The sweet crone Trinity, Mama Yael, Sister Myra, and Sila Eliana Day. Well, good evening. And tonight we will be talking about one of the two necessities of life. They are breath and water. And so tonight we will be discussing the science of breath. Okay, give me 1 second so I can get situated here. Okay. So the definition of breath is very simple. The air taken into or expelled from the lungs. For instance, I am gasping for breath. An inhalation or exhalation of air from the lungs. Plural, breaths. She drew in quick breaths. The synonyms are inhalation, inspiration, gulp of air. The archaic meaning is the power of breathing, life. The synonyms are life, life force. There is breath left in her. Now, life is not about getting, life is about letting go. So as you take in your breath, you must also let it go. According to Go Gratitude, every breath, as word or wondrous sigh, precipitates change. Now, imagine our bodily waters flowing, breath by breath, covering all creation in a mist of intention time. As focus goes, so will creation flow. Go gratitude. Breathe easily, releasing vaporized sighs of matters realized through intention gratitude. Om. Breath contains both air and moisture. The moisture or water is impregnated and charged with the flowing magnetism of feelings that attracts that which has been willed, visualized, and thought into form. Even the smallest amount of charged water has the ability to change all water that it comes into contact with. On the out-breath, the moisture is the breath. The moisture in the breath is in immediate contact with the moisture in the air of the macrocosm. And this magnetism ripples out to the entire unified field of magnetic energy in the astral plane. Now, tonight, I am going to be reading from a PDF file that is actually linked on the blog, Divine Connection Church. So you can go there at divineconnectionchurch.wordpress.com, and you can read along with me when you click on the link at the bottom of the post for the Science of Breath. This is Hindu yoga, and it was written by Yogi Rama Sharaka. He is also the author of Yogi Philosophy and Oriental Occultism, Advanced Course in Yogi Philosophy, Hatha Yogi, Psychic Healing. So, Salam, the first chapter. The Western student is apt to be somewhat confused in his or her ideas regarding the yogis and their philosophy and practice. Travelers to India have written great tales about the hordes of fakirs, mendicants, and mountebanks who infest the great roads of India and the streets of its cities, and who impudently claim the title yogi. The Western student is scarcely to be blamed for thinking of a typical yogi as an emaciated, fanatical, dirty, ignorant Hindu who either sits in a fixed posture until his body becomes ossified, or else holds his arm up in the air until it becomes stiff and withered, and forever after remains in that position, or perhaps clenches his fist and holds it tight until his fingernails grow through the palms of his hand. That these people exist is true, but their claim to the title yogi seems as absurd to the true yogi as does the claim to the title doctor on the part of a man who pares one's corns seem to the eminent surgeon, or as does the title of professor, as assumed by the street corner vendor of worm medicine seem to the president of Harvard or Yale. There have been for ages past in India and other Oriental countries men who devoted their time and attention to the development of man, physically, mentally, and spiritually. The experience of generations of earnest seekers has been handed down for centuries, from teacher to pupil, and gradually a definite yogi science was built up. To these investigators and teachers was finally applied the term yogi, from the Sanskrit word yug, meaning to join. From the same source comes the English word yoke, with a similar meaning. Its use in connection with these teachings is difficult to trace, different authorities giving different explanations. But probably the most ingenious is that which holds that it is intended as a Hindu equivalent for the idea conveyed by the English phrase getting into harness or yoking up, as the yogi undoubtedly gets into harness in his work of controlling the body and mind by the will. Yoga is divided into several branches, ranging from that which teaches the control of the body to that which teaches the attainment of the highest spiritual development. In the work, we will not go into the higher phases of the subject, except when the science of breath touches upon the same. The science of breath touches yoga at many points, and although chiefly concerned with the development and control of the physical, has also its psychic side and even enters the field of spiritual development. In India, there are great schools of yoga comprising thousands of the leading minds of the great country. The yoga philosophy is the rule of life for many people. The pure yogi teachings, however, are given only to the few, the masses being satisfied with the crumbs which fall from the tables of the educated classes, the Oriental custom in this respect being opposed to that of the Western world. But Western ideals are beginning to have their effect, even in the Orient, and teachings which were once given only to the few are now freely offered to anyone who is ready to receive them. The East and the West are growing closer together, and both are profiting by the close contact, each influencing the other. The Hindu yogis have always paid great attention to the science of breath for reasons which will be apparent to the student who reads this book. Many Western writers have touched upon this phrase of the yogi teaching, but we believe that it has been reserved for the writer of this work to give to the Western student. In concise form and simple language, the underlying principles of the yogi science of breath, together with many of the favorite yogi breathing exercises and methods. We have given the Western idea as well as the Oriental, showing how one dovetails into the other. We have used the ordinary English terms almost entirely, avoiding the Sanskrit terms, so confusing to the average Western reader. The first part of the book is devoted to the physical phase of the science of breath. Then the psychic and mental sides are considered. And finally, the spiritual side is touched upon. We may be pardoned if we express ourselves as pleased with our success in condensing so much yogi lore into so few pages, and by the use of words and terms which may be understood by anyone. Our only fear is that its very simplicity may cause some to pass it by as unworthy of attention, while they pass on their way searching for something deep, mysterious, and non-understandable. However, the Western mind is eminently practical, and we know that it is only a question of a short time before it will recognize the practicability of this work. We greet you, students, with our most profound salam and bid you be seated for your lessons in yogi philosophy. Chapter 2, Breath is Life. Life is absolutely dependent upon the act of breathing. Breath is life. Differ as they may upon details of theory and terminology, the Oriental and the Occidental agree upon these fundamental principles. To breathe is to live, and without breath there is no life. Not only are the higher animals dependent upon breath for life and health, but even the lower forms of animal life must breathe to live, and plant life is likewise dependent upon the air for continued existence. The infant draws into a long, deep breath, retains it for a moment to extract from it its life-giving properties, and then it exhales it in a long wail, and lo, its life upon earth has begun. The old man gives a faint gasp, ceases to breathe, and life is over. From the first faint breath of the infant to the last gasp of the dying man, it is one long story of continued breathing. Life is but a series of breaths. Breathing may be considered the most important of all the functions of the body, for indeed, all the other functions depend upon it. Man may exist some time without eating, a shorter time without drinking, but without breathing, his existence may be measured by a few minutes. And not only is man dependent upon breath for life, but he is largely dependent upon correct habits of breathing for continued vitality and freedom from disease. An intelligent control of our breathing power will lengthen our days upon the earth by giving us increased vitality and powers of resistance. And on the other hand, unintelligent and careless breathing will tend to shorten our days by decreasing our vitality and laying us open to disease. Mankind, in its normal state, had no need of instruction in breathing. Like the lower animal and the child, people breathe naturally and properly, as nature intended them to do. But civilization has changed people in this and other respects. People have contracted improper methods and attitudes of walking, standing, sitting, which have robbed them of their birthright of natural and correct breathing. They have paid a high price for civilization. The savage today breathes naturally, unless he has been contaminated by the habits of civilized man. The percentage of civilized men who breathe correctly is quite small, and the result is shown in contracted chests and stooping shoulders, and the terrible increase in diseases of the respiratory organ, including that dead monster consumption, the white scourge. Eminent authorities have stated that one generation of correct breathers would regenerate the race, and disease would be so rare as to be looked upon as a curiosity. Whether looked at from the standpoint of the Oriental or Occidental, the connection between correct breathing and health is readily seen and explained. The Occidental teachings show that the physical health depends very materially upon correct breathing. The Oriental teachers not only admit that their Occidental brothers are right, but say that in addition to the physical benefit derived from correct habits of breathing, man's mental power, happiness, self-control, clear-sightedness, morals, and even spiritual growth may be increased by an understanding of the science of breath. Whole schools of Oriental philosophy have been founded upon this science. And this knowledge, when grasped by the Western races and by their put to the practical use, which is their strong point, will work wonders among them. The theory of the East, wedded to the practice of the West, will produce worthy offspring. This work will take up the yogi science of breath, which includes not only all that is known to the Western physiologists and hygienists, but the occult side of the subject as well. It not only points out the way to physical health along the lines of what Western scientists have termed deep breathing, but also goes into the less known phases of the subject and shows how the Hindu yogi controls his body, increasing his mental capacity, and develops the spiritual side of his nature by the science of breath. The yogi practices exercises by which he attains control of his body and is enabled to send to any organ or part an increased flow of vital force or prana, thereby strengthening and invigorating the part or organ. He knows all that his Western scientific brother knows about the physiological effect of correct breathing, but he also knows that the air contains more than oxygen and hydrogen and nitrogen, and that something more is accomplished than the mere oxygenating of the blood. He knows something about prana, of which his Western brother is ignorant, and he is fully aware of the nature and manner of handling that great principle of energy, and is fully informed as to its effects upon the human body and mind. He knows that by rhythmical breathing, one may bring himself into harmonious vibration with nature and aid in the unfoldment of his latent powers. He knows that by controlled breathing, he may not only cure disease in himself and others, but also practically do away with fear and worry and the baser emotions. To teach these things is the object of this work. We will give in a few chapters concise explanations and instructions, which might be extended into volumes. We hope to awaken the minds of the Western world to the value of the yogi science of breath. Now, at this moment, I'm going to open the queue to comment on what has been said. Please hit *6, and you can come in and speak. I'll give you a moment. Okay, no one's coming in, so I will continue to read. Chapter 3, the exoteric theory of breath. In this chapter, we will give you briefly the theories of the Western scientific world regarding the functions of the respiratory organs and the part in the human economy played by the breath. In subsequent chapters, we will give the additional theories and ascertained facts of the Oriental school of thought and research. The Oriental accepts the theories and facts of his Western brothers, which have been known to him for centuries, and adds thereto much that the latter do not know, now accept, but which they will in due time discover, and which after renaming they will present to the world as a great truth. And that's called capitalism and appropriation. That's just my thought. But anyway, before taking up the Western idea, it will perhaps be better to give a hasty general idea of the organs of respiration. The organs of respiration consist of the lungs and the air passages leading to them. The lungs are 2 in number and occupy the pleural chamber of the thorax, 1 on each side in the median line, being separated from each other by the heart, the greater blood vessels, and the larger air tubes. Each lung is free in all directions except at the root, which consists chiefly of the bronchi, arteries, and veins connecting the lungs with the trachea and heart. The lungs are spongy and porous, and their tissues are very elastic. They are covered with a delicately constructed but strong sac known as the pleural sac, one wall of which closely adheres to the lung and the other to the inner wall of the chest, and which secretes a fluid which allows the inner surfaces of the walls to glide easily upon each other in the act of breathing. The air passages consist of the interior of the nose, pharynx, larynx, windpipe, or trachea, and the bronchial tubes. When we breathe, we draw in the air through the nose, in which it is warmed by contact with the mucous membrane, which is richly supplied with blood. And after it is passed through the pharynx and larynx, it passes into the trachea or windpipe, which subdivides into numerous tubes called the bronchial tubes, which in turn subdivide into the terminate in minute subdivisions in all the small air spaces in the lungs, of which the lungs contain millions. A writer has stated that if the air cells of the lungs were spread out over an unbroken surface, they would cover an area of 14,000 feet. The air is drawn into the lungs by the action of the diaphragm, a great, strong, flat, sheet-like muscle stretched across the chest, separating the chest box from the abdomen. The diaphragm's action is almost as automatic as that of the heart, although it may be transformed into a semi-voluntary muscle by an effort of the will. When it expands, it increases the size of the chest and lungs, and the air rushes into the vacuum thus created. When it relaxes, the chest and lungs contract, and the air is expelled from the lungs. Now, before considering what happens to the air in the lungs, let us look a little into the matter of the circulation of the blood. The blood, as you know, is driven by the heart through the arteries into the capillaries, thus reaching every part of the body, which it vitalizes, nourishes, and strengthens. It then returns by means of the capillaries by another route, the veins, to the heart, from whence it is drawn to the lung. The blood starts on its arterial journey, bright red and rich, laden with life-giving qualities and properties. It returns by the venous route, poor, blue, and dull, being laden down with the waste matter of the system. It goes out like a fresh stream from the mountains. It returns as a stream of sewer water. This foul stream goes to the right auricle of the heart. When this auricle becomes filled, it contracts and forces the stream of blood through an opening in the right ventricle of the heart, which in turn sends it to the lungs, where it is distributed by millions of hair-like blood vessels to the air cells of the lungs, of which we have spoken. Now let us take up the story of the lungs at this part. The foul stream of blood is now distributed among the millions of tiny hair cells in the lung. A breath of air is inhaled, and the oxygen of the air comes in contact with the impure blood through the thin walls of the hair-like blood vessels of the lungs, which walls are thick enough to hold the blood, but thin enough to admit the oxygen to penetrate them. When the oxygen comes in contact with blood, a form of combustion takes place, and the blood takes up oxygen and releases carbonic acid gas generated from the waste products and poisonous matter, which has been gathered up by the blood from all parts of the system. The blood, thus purified and oxygenated, is carried back to the heart, again rich, red, and bright, and laden with life, giving properties and qualities. Upon reaching the left auricle of the heart, it is forced into the left ventricle, from whence it is again forced out through the arteries on its mission of life to all parts of the system. It is estimated that in a single day of 24 hours, 35,000 pints of blood traverse the capillaries of the lung. The blood corpuscles passing in single file and being exposed to the oxygen of the air on both of their surfaces. When one considers the minute detail of the process alluded to, he is lost in wonderment and admiration at nature's infinite care and intelligence. It will be seen that unless fresh air is in sufficient quantity reaches the lungs, the foul stream of venomous blood cannot be purified. And consequently, not only is the body thus robbed of nourishment, but the waste products, which should have been destroyed, are returned to the circulation and poison the system, and death ensues. Impure air acts in the same way, only in a lessened degree. It will also be seen that if one does not breathe in a sufficient quantity of air, the work of the blood cannot go on properly. And the result is that the body is insufficiently nourished and disease ensues, or a state of imperfect health is experienced. The blood of one who breathes improperly is, of course, of a bluish dark color, lacking the rich redness of pure arterial blood. This often shows itself in a poor complexion. Proper breathing and a consequent good circulation results in a clear, bright complexion. A little reflection will show the vital importance of correct breathing. If the blood is not fully purified by the regenerative process of the lung, it returns to the arteries in an abnormal state, insufficiently purified and imperfectly cleansed of the impurities which it took up on its return journey. These impurities, if returned to the system, will certainly manifest in some form of disease, either in a form of blood disease or some disease resulting from impaired functioning of some insufficiently nourished organ or tissue. The blood, when properly exposed to the air in the lungs, not only has its impurities consumed and parts with its noxious carbonic acid gas, but it also takes up and absorbs a certain quantity of oxygen, which it carries to all parts of the body, where it is needed in order that nature may perform her processes properly. When the oxygen comes in contact with the blood, It unites with the hemoglobin of the blood and is carried to every cell, tissue, muscle, and organ, which it invigorates and strengthens, replacing worn-out cells and tissue by new materials which nature converts to her use. Arterial blood, properly exposed to the air, contains about 25% of free oxygen. Okay, this book is linked at divineconnectionchurch.wordpress.com at the bottom of today's post, The Science of Breath. I'm going to again call to hit *6 if you have any questions or comments about the science of breath. Talk to me. This is Mama Yah. Okay. No one's talking tonight. Not only is every part vitalized by the oxygen, but the act of digestion depends materially upon a certain amount of oxygenation of the food. And this can be accomplished only by the oxygen in the blood coming in contact with the food and producing a certain form of combustion. It is therefore necessary that a proper supply of oxygen be taken through the lungs. This accounts for the fact that weak lungs and poor digestion are so often found together. To grasp the full significance of this statement, one must remember that the entire body receives nourishment from the food assimilated, and that imperfect assimilation always means an imperfectly nourished body. Even the lungs themselves depend upon the same source of nourishment. And if through imperfect breathing, the assimilation becomes imperfect, and the lungs in turn become weakened, they are rendered still less able to perform their work properly. And so in turn, the blood becomes further weakened. Every particle of food and drink must be oxygenated before it can yield as the proper nourishment, and before the waste products of the system can be reduced to the proper condition to be eliminated from the system. Lack of sufficient oxygen means imperfect nutrition, imperfect elimination, and imperfect health. Verily, breath is life. The combustion arising from the change in the waste products generates heat and equalizes the temperature of the body. Good breathers are not apt to take cold, and they generally have plenty of good warm blood, which enables them to resist the changes in the outer temperature. In addition to the above-mentioned important processes, the act of breathing gives exercise to the internal organs and muscles, which feature is generally overlooked by the Western writers on the subject, but which the yogi is fully appreciative of. In imperfect or shallow breathing, only a portion of the lung cells are brought into play, and a great portion of the lung capacity is lost. The system suffering in proportion to the amount of under-oxygenation. The lower animals in their native state breathe naturally, and primitive man undoubtedly did the same. The abnormal manner of living adopted by civilized man, the shadow that follows upon civilization, has robbed us of our natural habit of breathing, and the race has greatly suffered thereby. Man's only physical salvation is to get back to nature. Chapter 4, the esoteric theory of breath. The science of breath, like many other teachings, has its esoteric or inner phase, as well as its exoteric or external. The physiological phase may be termed the outer or exoteric side of the subject, and the phase which we will now consider may be termed its esoteric or inner side. Occultists in all ages and lands have always taught, usually secretly to a few followers, that there was to be found in the air a substance or principle from which all activity, vitality, and life was derived. They differed in their terms and names for this force, as well as in the details of the theory. But the main principle is to be found in all occult teachings and philosophy, and has for centuries formed a portion of the teachings of the Oriental yogis. In order to avoid misconceptions arising from the various theories regarding this great principle, which theories are usually attached to some name given the principle, we in this work will speak of the principle of prana, Prana. This word being the Sanskrit term meaning absolute energy. Many occult authorities teach that the principle, which the Hindus term prana, is the universal principle of energy or force, and that all energy or force is derived from that principle, or rather, is a particular form of manifestation of that principle. These theories do not concern us in the consideration of the subject matter of this work, and we will therefore confine ourselves to the understanding of prana as the principle of energy exhibited in all living things, which distinguishes them from a lifeless thing. We may consider it as the active principle of life, vital force, if you please. It is found in all forms of life, from the amoeba to man, and from the most elementary form of plant life to the highest form of animal life. Prana is all-pervading. It is found in all things having life. And as the occult philosophy teaches, that life is in all things, in every atom, the apparent lifelessness of some things being only a lesser degree of manifestation, we may understand their teaching that prana is everywhere in everything. Prana must not be confounded with the ego, that bit of divine spirit in every soul around which clusters matter and energy. Prana is merely a form of energy used by the ego in its material manifestation. When the ego leaves the body, the prana, being no longer under its control, responds only to the orders of the individual atoms or groups of atoms forming the body. And as the body disintegrates and is resolved to its original element, each atom takes with it sufficient prana to enable it to form new combinations. The unused prana returning to the great universal storehouse from which it came. With the ego in control, cohesion exists, and the atoms are held together by the will of the ego. Prana is the name by which we designate a universal principle, which principle is the essence of all motion, force, or energy. Whether manifested in gravitation, electricity, the revolution of the planets, and all forms of life from the highest to the lowest. It may be called the soul of force and energy in all their forms. And that principle which, operating in a certain way, causes that form of activity which accompanies life. This great principle is in all forms of life, and yet it is not matter. It is in the air, but it is not the air, nor one of its chemical constituents. Animal and plant life breathe it in with air, and yet if the air contained it not, they would die, even though they might be filled with air. It is taken up by the system along with the oxygen, and yet is not the oxygen. The Hebrew writer of the book of Genesis knew the difference between the atmospheric air and the mysterious and potent principle contained within it. He speaks of Neshemet, rock Shayim, which translated means the breath of the spirit of life. In the Hebrew, Neshemet means the ordinary breath of atmospheric air, and Shayim means life or lives, while the word Ruach means the spirit of life, which occultists claim is the same principle which we speak of as prana. And I think that's pronounced Ruach, not Ruach. Ruach, R-U-A-C-H. Prana is in the atmospheric air, but it is also elsewhere, and it penetrates where the air cannot reach. The oxygen in the air plays an important part in sustaining animal life, and the carbon plays a similar part with plant life. But prana has its own distinct part to play in the manifestation of life, aside from the physiological functions. We are constantly inhaling the air charged with prana, and are as constantly extracting the latter from the air and appropriating it to our uses. Prana is found in its freest state in the atmospheric air, which when fresh is fairly charged with it, and we draw it to us more easily from the air than from any other source. In ordinary breathing, we absorb and extract a normal supply of prana. But by controlled and regulated breathing, known as yogi breathing, we are enabled to extract a greater supply, which is stored away in the brain and nerve centers to be used when necessary. We may store away prana just as the storage battery stores away electricity. The many powers attributed to advanced occultists is due largely to their knowledge of this fact and their intelligent use of this stored up energy. The yogis know that by certain forms of breathing, they establish certain relations with the supply of prana and may draw on the same for what they require. Not only do they strengthen all parts of their body in this way, but the brain itself may receive increased energy from the same source and latent faculties be developed and psychic powers attained. One who has mastered the science of storing away prana, either consciously or unconsciously, often radiates vitality and strength, which is felt by those coming in contact with him, And such a person may impart this strength to others and give them increased vitality and health, which is called magnetic healing, performed in this way. Although many practitioners are not aware of the source of their power. Again, I'm going to open the queue. We do have a caller. Area code 256. Your line is open.
Love and light, Mama Yah. I love hearing you. This is Amira in Alabama.
Hi, Amira.
Hi. I'm tired. I was washing, so I was just going to sit back and listen, but opportunity arrives again.
Okay.
And, yeah, that shallow breathing, I have to stop myself and do some deep breathing. And I heard one caller mention about putting your water in a glass and let it sit out in the direct sun for about half hour, and that will energize your water. And this week,
go ahead.
We learned here in the state of Alabama that so many counties' water is so contaminated, they're asking them to refrain from using your tap water until the end of the year. So, exciting times seem like it's right in our face now. And this is really good information because I noticed when I stop and do my deep breathing, and when I'm walking around, I'm like shallow breathing. I'm not really breathing really deep. And this information is really helpful because we need it. So that's what I just wanted to chime in and say. Thank you. And one heart, one mind, one spirit, and I yield.
Well, thank you. The reason in reading this book tonight is because it was one of the first books that I encountered when I was doing my seeking. Back, I think I told all of you, I started when I was about 21 years old. And I got this book, and I've read it intermittently during the years. I've always suggested it to friends and students. And so I wanted you to hear the first few chapters with the hopes that you would go to the blog, divineconnectionchurch.wordpress.com, and tonight's blog is The Science of Breath. Because if you're going to start at the beginning, breath is where you need to start. Now, one thing that the book will tell you, you could take a glass of water and you can just breathe into that water and purify it. However, with what is going on, particularly in the United States, I don't know about other countries, I know that China's water is putrefied. And, you know, we have Flint, Michigan, and you're saying now Alabama. I'm originally from New York, but I live in Florida, and I never drank the tap water here. I drink bottled water. I drink water from a Brita, or I boil my water and put lime in it. I also like cold water, so ice is a form of purified water as well. But due to the fact that we are co-creators with the universe, this information about prana, a lot of people never even heard that word. This information will give you more than hope. It will give you a knowledge that I believe some of the people on the call already have. But the book is there in PDF form for you to read. I am up to chapter 5, the nervous system, and then the nostrils versus mouth breathing. And I learned early on not to breathe through my mouth because it's like a vacuum cleaner. And when you breathe open mouth, you suck in all the impurities out of the air. So I learned to breathe through my nostrils. And if you read that chapter on nostril breathing, you'll understand that. Then there are the 4 methods of breathing: high breathing, mid breathing, low breathing, and the yogi complete breathing. So I have been using these practices, these exercises, throughout my life, and I think that it possibly could be why I can be calm in a storm. I don't panic. I keep my blood pressure low. Instead of taking a pill, you need to learn how to breathe correctly. So I'm hoping that everyone on this call will go to the link or just Google The Science of Breath by Rama Sharaka and read this tiny book. You can buy the book or you can just read the PDF file. It's 71 pages, and I guarantee you that if you do some of the exercises in this book, you will feel a better quality of life after doing this. Many people, they're vegetarian, they exercise a lot, but the beginning of health is proper breathing. So there is one exercise on page 48 that I have taught my music students. So I'm just going to read it, and it's the yogi rule for rhythmic breathing. So you sit erect in an easy posture, being sure to hold the chest, neck, and head as nearly in a straight line as possible, with shoulders slightly thrown back and hands resting easily on the lap. And keep your palms up, because with palms down, the energy cannot come into your system. In this position, the weight of the body is largely supported by the ribs, and the position may be easily maintained. The yogi has found that one cannot get the best effect of rhythmic breathing with the chest drawn in and the abdomen protruding. So now, inhale slowly, a complete breath, which is 6 pulse counts. If you put your fingers right below where that little hole is in your throat, you can feel your heartbeat. So just listen. So you're going to inhale for 6 pulse units. Then you're going to hold it for 3. Then you're going to exhale slowly through your nostrils, 6 counts. You're going to stay empty for 3. And then you're going to repeat this. But be careful. Don't do this exercise more than 10 times, because you will get lightheaded and you will be over-oxygenated. Oxygen is a very strong substance. Prana is a very, very strong substance. This is it's almost magical once you learn how to breathe properly. Then there's a cleansing breath, where you actually blow out all the negative energy in your body. So we're at the end of this call, but I again encourage you all to go to divineconnectionchurch.wordpress.com, read tonight's entry, The Science of Breath. And you can also, if you forget that, Google The Science of Breath, find the PDF file, and read it. If anyone else has anything to say, I'll wait a few minutes. *6 to come into the queue. And Amira, thank you for joining us this evening. Thank all of you for being here. Next week, I have a guest, and so you'll see that on Facebook when I put up the promo. And we will be talking about the Ascended Masters. Well, I thank you for being here tonight. And please continue to read the book, The Science of Breath. And I'm going to leave you with my love translation.
Translated